President Trump, he continues to call the Mueller probe a witch hunt. I know that's old news here, but Mueller, he is still on the hunt, and he's focusing even more on one Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager. He's in jail as we speak, and Mueller now asking for immunity for 5 witnesses who could testify against him. That is on the heels, of course, of Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein's announcement of the indictments against 12 Russian military officers who are accused of both hacking and tampering with our election. And now, many Republicans are calling for Rosenstein, believe it or not, to be impeached. Oh, and by the way, this woman, Maria Butina, she appeared in court today. Prosecutors say the Russian national acted as an illegal foreign agent who tried to infiltrate U.S. political groups, including the NRA. She also somehow showed up at the National Prayer Breakfast, which is a haven for right-wing politicians and causes. She's accused of aiding Russian efforts to influence U.S. politics. A lot to unpack here, and to help us do the impossible to make sense of the nonsensical is former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. Roland, so much to get into, so let me do this rapid-fire fashion with you, right? First of all, let's start with Mueller announcing that he's basically wants to give immunity to 5 people to testify against Manafort. Explain what an unidentified co-conspirator is, and also why it's so important.
Yeah, this is really a fascinating development for those of us that are sort of following the inside baseball of all of this. What Mr. Mueller is doing is asking the court to issue orders that will give immunity to 5 persons who he wants to call as witnesses against Mr. Manafort. These 5 persons must be asserting that they have a Fifth Amendment right not to testify against themselves, not to incriminate themselves, and that is why Mr. Mueller needs to seek immunity. So there are at least 5 people out there who think they could be convicted of a crime if they testified without immunity, and Mr. Mueller is calling their bet, getting immunity, and will call them as witnesses. It's too early to say for sure, Richard, whether this is just the beginning of a whole new line of prosecutions and attacks that Mr. Mueller will make, or whether this is simply shoring up his case against Mr. Manafort. We'll have to wait and see. But it does mean that there are a lot of people out there who are very concerned that they committed crimes, at least 5, and Roland, probably a lot more.
Roland, is the end game for Mueller here to flip Manafort so that he'll be a cooperating witness as well? Or is it that he's just trying to get the white collar? And I mean, it's compelling, both the scope of the information that was inside of it, and also the breadth of it. Talk about why these 12 indictments matter so much, especially to the probe.
This is a fascinating glimpse into the degree of detail that Mr. Mueller has, and the really superb work by the forensic computer investigators in this case. Mr. Mueller appears to know who was typing at which computer when any particular crime was committed. And with that kind of information, he's got a very powerful case. This is also an indictment that shows a clear connection between the Trump campaign in the person of Roger Stone and the Russians. This shows collusion between the two of them. Whether it amounts to the crime of conspiracy, we don't know, because Stone denies knowledge that he was dealing with the Russians. How credible that is, we're not in a position to judge yet. But my guess, Richard, is that this is the first of many, many connections between the Russians and the Trump campaign that have not been disclosed, and that's very significant.
Well, we'll go from 12 to a baker's dozen here, and again, straight out of a spy novel, Maria Butina, and not just her backstory here, but why they thought it was significant enough to charge her and to make sure she didn't get on a plane to go back to Moscow.
Right. Well, again, it may be their hope that she will flip as well. You know, she appears to have been the sort of Mata Hari of the Russian intelligence service, moving through every conservative organization she could for 2 purposes. First, I think to learn about the cultural issues that the Russians could use as a wedge in their media campaign on behalf of Trump, you know, the stuff they posted on Facebook, she could tell them what the conservative base was after. Second, she is a person who established through the NRA and perhaps other organizations a way for the Russians to funnel money to Trump. Millions of dollars traveled through the NRA to Trump, in the form of donations to the NRA that the NRA then turned around and bought ads for Trump with. And of course, the Russians were prohibited by law from donating directly to Trump. So this was a real workaround. So she was a very, very busy lady, and she must know where a lot of the bodies are buried. I'm sure that Mr. Mueller and his team would love to know what she knows.
Speaking of Mueller, obviously we talk a lot about obstruction and collusion, but compromise, obviously the Russian term for compromising intelligence. Listen, I've said before, I'm the last guy wearing the tinfoil hat here about conspiracy theories, but there has not been a rational explanation for the better part of 2 years as a candidate and as president. The one person that he continuously will defend, if not be obsequious to, is Vladimir Putin. Is that part of the Mueller probe to find out if there's compromising information that the Russian premier could have on our president?
Yes, Richard, it clearly is. You know, we know that from the press reports that Mr. Mueller's team was probing the Steele dossier to see if the allegations in that dossier were accurate, and they found that most of them were. And that dossier really is all about compromise of Trump. And indeed, if Trump was compromised, and you know, the way he behaves, it certainly seems like he could have been, particularly after that news conference in Helsinki. If Trump was compromised, again, that would provide the Russians with a way to manipulate him in connection with the election. So the issue of compromise and Trump is right down the middle of Mr. Mueller's brief in terms of what he's supposed to investigate, influence on the election. And so compromise is part of that.
Then I was talking yesterday about that oath that every president takes to protect us from enemies, both domestic and within. Yeah. And even if there's empirical evidence to say that it happened otherwise, we don't know what the political solution will be. But Roland, I appreciate it, at least as we navigate the legal side of this, await Mueller's findings. It is never a dull week, my friend. Thank you so much.
No, it is very interesting. Thank you, Richard, for having me.
All right, everyone. When we come back, some of the sound you may not have heard with all the noise going on. Barack Obama speaks, but will the world listen? Obama sounding alarm and much more as Republicans are even doing the same. But the question is, what will they do between the words and the action? Stay with us.